I've come to tell you what I see. There are great darknesses.
You kill me, bitch. That's the joke of all time.
Keep away from the windows. Somebody might blow you a kiss.
Silencio. Silencio.
Don't you like the taste of blood?
You have meddled with the primal forces of nature, Mr. Beale.
I shall now count from 1 to 10.
We're gonna get done, dude!
He hates these cans! Because he's here!
Alright, what's up? I'm Nick.
I'm Harry.
You're listening to Cinematic Oblivion.
We got a couple movies tonight. Where do you want to start? Should we start with Hell High?
Growing up, for most kids, is a lot of fun. They're always doing things they shouldn't. We all remember our own secret little fantasies about our favorite teacher.
I think we should start with Hell High.
Okay.
Now, as anyone who's listened to this knows, we love slasher movies quite a bit. And I stumbled across this in the usual obscure media annals of the internet.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of YouTube channels devoted to kind of unknown slasher movies. This kind of cropped up with all the other unknown slasher movies like Return to Horror High. I think I was watching Cheerleader Camp 1988.
Yeah, we've watched a lot of really bad slasher movies, so you'd think that we'd seen them all, but occasionally we find one that we haven't even heard of, and that was the case with Hell High.
If you think these kids are a problem during the day, you should see them after school.
Hell High.
I don't want to characterize it as we've seen a lot of bad slasher movies.
We have. We've seen every type of slasher.
Yes, bad ones, but also just obscure ones. They're hidden gems, all kinds of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So Hell High, I stumbled across because it literally was like on autoplay after something I'd been watching before. Maybe Cheerleader Camp or something like that.
I've actually found a couple movies that way.
But it came on, and it had all the... As it began, I kind of wasn't like necessarily invested in watching a whole movie.
Mm-hmm.
It came on, and basically I was like... It had the opening of a slasher movie. It's a little girl playing with her doll. She walks down to like a swamp.
Yeah.
She's playing a doll game. And then two teenagers, they ride up on a motorbike. There's this very dubious consent, almost sex scene where the biker's like, come on, let's just do it. And the girl's like...
He's furious that she doesn't want to do it in the mud. He's
Yeah.
like, what's the matter with you? What are you, a bitch? And he's like all mad.
Which is a really good characterization of the kind of guys throughout this entire movie.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And then basically what happens is that the girl's like, I don't want to do it here. And the guy's like, fine, let's go. And he like, gets on his bike, and the little girl has been watching all of this.
Yeah.
Standard.
Well, they break the little girl's doll.
Right. That's the kind of the crucial aspect. He breaks the doll just because he's fucking pissed off.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be, I'm assuming, like the 50s because it's like a greaser that we see on the bike. That's classic compatible nostalgia. They love the 50s and the 80s.
Yeah.
So it's the 50s. He breaks the girl's doll off. The little girl... I thought they were setting up because they're speeding away on their motorcycle. I think we both probably thought that they're going to hit the little girl, and that's the inciting crime. But
no, she throws a bucket full of mud from the swamp on them, and they crash the motorcycle, and they both get impaled on like pieces of a fence that are just in the swamp for no reason,
for no apparent reason.
But it's pretty brutal and
like dry moat medieval style pikes.
Yeah, just giant wooden like pikes. Yeah, sticking out of the grass,
completely impaled through the neck, through the chest, dead. And the little girl sees it. Then we get the classic, one of my favorite tropes of the slasher movie, 17 years later.
Right.
I think it says. And this little girl is now a teacher. Mm-hmm. And she's in a room full of, just ungrateful students. And basically, from there, the movie is not so much a slasher until the very end.
Well, it's not, I wouldn't call it a slasher at all. It's like a weird teen violent thriller.
Exactly.
And let me say, first of all, that I love Hell High.
I really liked it a lot.
Good.
That's why I just kept watching it.
Yeah, and I was actually really surprised at what it was. And so once I'm an hour into the movie and no one's been murdered, but I wasn't like, why hasn't anyone been murdered? I was interested in the movie.
You made a really good comparison that it's more of one of those teen dramas like Bully.
Yeah, it's a lot like an 80s version of Bully.
Larry Clark's Bully, not the documentary Bully, which is about bullying. Larry Clark's Bully, which is based on a true story of a bunch of Florida kids who teamed up and murdered one of their quote-unquote friends who was a real manipulative psycho on the group.
So the basic plot is in, the high school in the 80s, that John, played by the guy from Breaking Bad.
Yeah. We're talking about Bully now.
No, I'm talking about
Hell High?
Hell High.
John is Breaking Bad?
He's Skyler's boss in Breaking Bad.
Which one's John John? The football guy.
Yeah.
We have kind of our protagonist who's like...
who just quit the football team because they're super intense, and he like starts hanging out with these punk kids. And at the beginning of the movie, you're like, the football guys are like asshole jocks, and the punk kids are kind of like, cool and fun. And the leader of the punks, Dickens, is like this kind of snarky, fun guy. He's a little edgy, but he's still like, you're kind of into him.
Yeah, Dickens, played fantastically by Christopher Stryker, what a name, is like this New Jersey, like, wannabe gangster.
Hey, John, I hear you quit being a football hero. In fact, I hear you're kind of a coward.
Dickens, what do you want?
Well, they say you're a coward, and they say that I'm a crazy son of a bitch, no good for nothing.
Yeah? So what's the point?
Well, we have a good time. And we're all rejects from this place. All they try and do at this school is mold us into exactly everything that we hate.
I don't know, Dickens. I heard some pretty strange things about you.
Hey, look what they say about you. Look, we have a good time. Prove it to those jerk-off football players that you don't need that kind.
Well, the whole cool thing, too, is it's an 80s movie about, like, the subversive punk characters, but they're over the top in their actions, but they don't have, like, chains and leather jackets and spiked hair like a lot of the, like, 80s punks. They're, like, kind of dressed like normal people.
And so we've got our typical group of shitty kids to start. We've got the kid who's not so shitty. He just quit the football team, and he's kind of dabbling in the punk bad behavior world. That's John. And then we've got Dickens, who's the ringleader, and he's a real asshole. Like, think Alex from A Clockwork Orange.
Well, yeah, you would think he's just an asshole, and then as the movie goes on, you start to realize that he's, like, a legitimate sociopath.
Then they've got the girl of the group, who's sort of Dickens' girlfriend, but sort of is into John. She's kind of just everyone's girlfriend, except for Smiler, who's the fat, funny guy of the group, which is very standard in a lot of slasher movies. You get that guy, too.
Yeah.
In The Burning, it's George Costanza.
Yeah.
In Cheerleader Camp, there's, I think, the best version of that character. And Smiler is, at first, like, insanely annoying. Like, there's always the fat guy in slasher.
He doesn't really say much.
He makes jokes, he laughs, he throws popcorn.
Yeah.
And what's kind of weird, and what we like about this movie, is that it gets more and more sort of, like, I don't want to say it's, like, crazy deep, but it gets a little existential.
It gets, like, serious. So the basic plot is this group of guys wants to prank their teacher, who is the little girl from the beginning.
Miss Brooke Storm is the name of the teacher.
Okay.
And she's their rattled, kind of nervous chemistry
she's
teacher.
like a shut-in. She doesn't go out. The gym, the coach tries to ask her out on dates, and he takes her to the football game, and then he tries to take her home, and he goes, oh, man, I would have been in the sack if we'd won the game.
Why, those kids really let me down. If we'd have won the game, she couldn't have waited to get me in the sack. Those little bastards made me look bad. They better pray tomorrow never comes.
There's a real jerky old coach. He's given John a lot of shit for quitting the football team.
Yeah.
But what I thought was cool is that we get a lot of jock bullies in slasher movies. And in this movie, the bully, Dickens, hates fucking jocks.
Yeah,
he's like, only lame people join the football team. And they even prank the footballer early on.
Yeah.
And eventually they convince John to drive a car onto the football field during the game, do donuts, and catch the football.
Yeah, which was a cool scene.
Well, like, 80s music plays as though it's this, like, glorious, rebellious moment.
Yeah.
It's almost like something out of, like, Animal House or something like that.
So they go to prank the teacher, and that's when the movie takes a turn, is that it's not just like a prank gone wrong. It's a prank that slowly turns into them just kind of torturing this woman.
Mm-hmm.
So they start by getting mud from the swamp, and they start, like, pouring it down her windows and banging on the roof, not realizing that she has, like, PTSD and stuff. They think she's just, like, an old bitch.
Yeah,
but
that's the whole thing.
It triggers her PTSD, and she starts having a freak out. And instead of being like, oh, we should get out of here, she's having a freak out, they're like, oh, let's just horribly torture her.
Yeah, Dickens is like, oh, they like, don't leave for so long.
Yeah.
Basically, and that's the important thing is also, you start to realize early on that, like, Queenie and John are kind of like, they've got futures. John keeps talking about his future. You're going to ruin my future, man.
Mm-hmm.
And Dickens says, and this was the first hint that the movie had sort of an existential undertone, he says, there's nothing after high school. Yeah. And he says it in that New Jersey accent where you're like, this kid is like, wants to die. He's got like a death wish.
He's such a good character and such a good villain. And throughout the movie, he gets progressively more fucked up. One of the early scenes where you see him be really shitty is like, John and the girl are like, they're in the swamp, they're like starting to get romantic and they're talking, and they go in to kiss. and Dickens comes up behind them and throws swamp mud on them.
Yeah. So it's important also that the swamp is clearly like a place in this community where people congregate, because the first place these kids go 17 years later is the same swamp where Miss Brooke Storm...
Where she used the same mud to cause her troubles.
Right, so they collect... Dickens, they just go with him. He's like, listen, I got a plan.
We're going to collect swamp mud in trash bags.
We're just going to trust me. We're going to get slime. Get some slime.
They keep saying slime, yeah.
And then they get to her house. They all put on freaky masks, like demon masks, kind of. Which,
and they stomp on her roof.
They stomp on her roof. They throw slime at the window. They really give her a fright. And then pretty much at that point, Smiler and Queenie and John John are all like, okay, good prank, let's go. Yeah. At this point, Miss Storm is inside freaking the fuck out, having like PTSD recurrence. Right. And at this point, you'd think, okay, I see where it's going. It's like they're going to set off her PTSD and she's going to kill them one by one. Well, yes.
No, but it takes 40 more minutes to do that.
It's first Dickens is like, well, I'm going to go back in the house. Her Miss Storm's friend shows up for a second, and as people dealt with things in the 80s, she's like, "Oh, some kids played a prank on you, and now
I'll just leave.
And now you're super upset. I'm going to basically force you to take a Quaalude and then take off."
Right, which turns out to be a bad thing because Dickens comes back in and she's all drugged out, and there's this great and disturbing scene.
It really takes the movie to a new, as I said, like Clockwork Orange level,
where Dickens decides he's going to rape her while she's passed out on this drugs.
And even when Queenie comes in and is like,
that's the best part of that scene.
Yeah, right.
Queenie comes in and she's like disgusted.
You think?
Well, no, she is.
Yeah.
She's disgusted with Dickens, and you think she's going to be like, how can you do this? But she's like, that's not how you do it. And she pushes Dickens on and takes over.
Yeah, and she joins in on the whole fantasy of it all. And Smiler, this is where, okay, so Smiler, the fat, funny guy, we've seen him so far laughing like an idiot, like he's on nitrous oxide. He's at the football game earlier throwing popcorn on these guys, just repeatedly throwing popcorn and thinking it's the funniest thing on earth. And then as he leaves, he pours all the popcorn on him. So we just see Smiler being an idiot. But then at this point, he starts to say stuff that isn't funny, but still does his token, like, laughing. And at this point, it starts, like, in the early part of the movie, he's like, I'm throwing popcorn on these guys. And then in the end, he's like, we need to get out of here. We're going to jail. Hey, maybe he ditched us. Maybe she called the cops. Like, stuff that's not funny, but he's still laughing.
Yeah.
And then John John's the only one who comes in during this attempted rape and is like, this has gone way too far.
Yeah.
We have to get out of here. And that's when Dickens confronts him and says the line you mentioned, right? Which is, she's just another victim.
No, that's earlier when they're going to assault him, where he says like, you know she's real, right? And he goes, no, she's just another victim, which is like such a deep level of sociopathy for like a high schooler to have.
That's when you realize that Dickens is a complete Alex from Clockwork Orange.
Yeah.
It's not that I'm scared, but she's real. This is big time stuff and real trouble if we blow it.
What do you mean she's real? She's just another victim. And besides, everybody knows you're just a coward, John John.
Basically, at this point, it becomes kind of a standoff between John John, who has quote unquote a future, that you're going to ruin my future, and Dickens. They decide to leave, and then Dickens, because he's just not done, says we've got to make this even more complicated.
Yeah.
Because we left our fingerprints everywhere. She's hurt. Oh no! What happens is
she jumps out the window
in the attempted rape. She wakes up, jumps out the window, and they assume she's dead, or they check her pulse and she's supposedly dead.
Right.
Dickens then comes up with this crazy plan because he's never had enough revenge on the football players.
They're going to frame the football quarterback for murder.
It's a convoluted plan where he says, John, you got to go to the diner, get the main footballer's jacket. We plan it at the scene. He goes to jail. Someone's got to go to jail. And for a long time, it seems like John keeps talking about jail like it's a place Dickens starts talking about jail like it's a place he's always expected to end up. Like, this the slam up for sure. This is when the movie turns into, like, Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit, or like Beckett's Waiting for Godot.
Well, there's a 10-minute sequence where John leaves and where's Queenie?
I think she, I think she's just there waiting in the car.
But, and Dickens and the fat guy have like this weird standoff, like waiting in the room, where the fat guy keeps saying...
Well, so Smiler, who's been funny the whole time and laughing, you've watched him degrade, as we said. Go ahead.
He just turns into this, like, weird, like, just starts saying, like, kind of poetic and existential shit, and he's clearly, like, nervous and freaking out. And you have this weird 10-minute sequence where he's just, like, picking apart Dickens psychologically.
Yeah.
And there's this great part where he turns to Dickens and goes, women really have your number. And Dickens is like, that ain't so. And he goes, isn't it? And then Dickens sees a little female statuette and he picks it up and smashes it.
Women sure got your number, Dickens.
That's bullshit.
Is it?
Yeah, that's where it starts to feel like some sort of like Mammoth play or
Well,
something.
it's very, the whole movie is very, and like, we don't need to just describe the plot. Like, the reason I liked it is because the whole thing had a weird, offsetting tone and was like, kind of like a play. Like, the characters were like the characters out of a play. They were hyper real, and they spoke kind of poetically and with like double meaning. And there was like, just like kind of bizarre themes near the end. There were a couple corny parts where the fat guy says like, Mama told me there'd be days like this. It's like, all right, dude, we get it. But there's another part where it's just like, things are bad for me. They haven't been good for me. And
that was the
like,
line.
I know.
Yeah, that was the line where the Smiler turned. He said, you know, things haven't been good for me for quite a while. And he suddenly wasn't saying it in his funny voice. And Dickens says, I know that, pal. Like Dickens and Smiler are almost in it together in their Thanatos, their death wish. They just want to end up in jail or dead. They're sick of life.
But then it turns into, for the last 20 minutes, it gets a little slashery. But it's it's not a crazy killer is killing people. It's a woman has been driven insane through repeated trauma by these horrible kids, and now she's gone insane. And she thinks, the cool part is by the stuff she's saying, she thinks that they're the kids from before. Yeah. She says, like, you shouldn't have touched my doll. You should have stayed dead in the swamp. Like, she thinks they've come back from the dead.
In that way, it's more in the vein of, like, Last House on the Left or I Spit on Your Grave. It's one of those...
It turns sort of revengey.
Rape revenge, almost. And it's only in the last 20 minutes that we have kind of a killing spree. And I just want to mention one more thing, which is the last shot, or the last like scene of the movie, because then I think we can go deeper into the analysis.
Well, the second to last scene.
You were hinting at, both, is that John's the only survivor at the end. The teacher, Miss Storm, dies. Dickens, Queenie, Smiler, they all die. And the second to last shot is John in his room as like 80s synth music plays, and his parents are like, John, come to dinner, and you just see him watching TV, the blue lights on his face.
It keeps fading to later and later.
He's been watching TV all day, and then they show the TV and it's just static.
Yeah. And I thought when they first cut to that shot that it was an insane asylum, because his walls are completely white, he has no decorations, and his room is super sterile. And then when you hear his mother's voice, I'm like, oh, it's his bedroom.
Yes. And then at the end, the footballer does get carted off to jail for the crime. Yeah. And John laughs, but then the teacher comes over and says, what are you laughing at? And he screams. Yeah. And that's the end of the movie. It had that reflecting skin level, just like, I am now in
pure
agony.
Trauma.
Yeah. And so what the movie really is about is like and this is, at first, they threw a lot of dumb titles on to horror movies. I think specifically of how Night Warning was also called Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker, and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, I thought that the title Hell High probably had no significance.
No, and it was like clearly marketed as a slasher movie.
But hold up. Then by the end, I realized that Hell High does have significance. Because it's, if anything, it's like existential high school study. Because it's like 4 people who are leaving high school. They're in their classic, like, identity versus role confusion stage of the development, And John feels like he has an identity, but he's kind of just given up his identity, and Queenie's figuring out her identity, and Dickens and Smiler decide they have no identity. And so you watch these 4 high schoolers kind of wrestle with the idea of what life is going to be like beyond. 2 of them don't believe there is life beyond high school. One of them does, but then he loses that belief, and then he's just left with the same kind of insanity that Miss Storm had.
Well, in that way, it's a lot more like No Exit, in that it's literally high school is hell.
It's like, if it had more characters, it would be more like Heathers. It only is, it's a kind of a bottle episode. That's why it's more like a play. There's about 5 major characters.
Yeah, and it takes place over the course of 12 hours or so.
Yeah, it's like real time. The sequences with them in masks are very, like, Kabuki-esque, kind of.
Yeah, I thought the movie was, like, pretty much, like, the other thing that was good about it is it wasn't corny at all. Like, it was very serious. There was one really corny part where a motorcycle explodes. Yeah. But that was pretty much it. Otherwise, it was very, like, straight and serious, which you don't get from a lot of 80s violent. I mean, I wouldn't even call this a slasher or a horror movie. This is like a violent thriller.
It's a violent teenage drama.
Yeah.
And it's got all things, it feels like almost like a true crime story, Like, it feels like something like Bully or Alpha Dog, where it's like, you watch this true crime story unfold, or maybe even, like, takes, the early home invasion scenes of A Clockwork Orange and just kind of expands on them in a realistic context. Yeah. And so in that sense, this was like a really good, not a slasher. I wouldn't call it a slasher. It has a slasher ending, kind of like Sunshine.
And it's clearly from the slasher era. It came out in 89.
Well, what's interesting is it came out in 89, which was kind of seen as the end of the slasher era, but it was actually made in 86, which was still pretty much in the dead heat of slasher time, but it wasn't released for 3 years, for whatever reason. So, that's Hell High. Do you have more to say about that?
Hell High.
I think that I would like to mention, though, that one of the best... I think my favorite shot of the film is still John staring at the static TV when you realize he's really lost his mind. But early on in the prank scene, which goes on for a while, where they're pranking her and she's having flashes of her childhood, and they're in the demon and monster masks, it was, as I said, very kabuki, which is good to transition into our actual kabuki film we saw, Yokai Monsters, Spook Warfare.
大変なんだい。みんなどこにいるんだい。
ここにいるったい。ゲストを変えて一体何やねん。
この本にも出てね、化け物が現れたんだい。
So, this guy at my job at the movie theater puts on special shows. Like every other week, he'll show a lot of foreign B movies and old sci-fi movies. And he was doing a double feature of samurai ghost movies, and I was talking to him about it. And he ended up giving me a couple DVDs to borrow. And one of them, the one that he gave the highest recommendation to, was Yokai Monsters, Spook Warfare, which is the second in a trilogy, technically. But none of the movies are related. They have none of the same actors, and none of them are by the same directors. So it doesn't matter. The only thing they have in common is that they feature yokai, which are Japanese spirits and monsters from mythology.
They're the canon of kabuki characters, basically. They had pre-existed these films in kabuki theater throughout Japan.
Yeah, and through just mythology.
Yeah, they're like standard figures of, I think, Shintoism. They might have been some of them based on real old Shinto, like, demi-demons.
But the point of a yokai in kabuki is that they wouldn't be the crux of the story. They would show up to aid a character or to make an event happen. They were like a Deus Ex Machina within a greater kabuki story that would just involve humans.
And think like Puck from Midsummer's Night Dream.
Very Shakespearean in that way.
Yeah, the chorus, yeah, exactly. You said it perfectly. So the plot basically is that, well, first off, I just want to talk about some of these monsters, and I wanted to say what you said, that the connecting thing being the main monsters, but each movie being different. The thing I really liked the monster suits. It was like the way they do Godzilla with rubber suits and little, practical effects, but done in a kind of a corny way that you can appreciate.
Yeah, and there's craftsmanship to it.
And the monsters aren't supposed to be giant. At one point, one of them gets giant, but they aren't supposed to be giant.
It's a brief summary of what's going on.
Right, okay, so the plot, fine. But I wanted to just say that what it reminds me of is kind of, for the layman, Power Rangers.
Power Rangers, or I actually was thinking is very Jim Henson.
So
the basic premise is that in the city of Ur in Babylon, it opens with a text crawl telling you about this ancient Babylonian demon that hasn't been seen in 5,000 years or something like that.
Yeah, think like Gilgamesh style vampire.
And then we see him rise up out of a tomb and go and stow away on a boat. And he's this ancient mummified vampire creature. Looks really cool. He stows away in the boat. He causes the boat to sink, but he ends up in Japan.
Yeah. Yeah, and so you've got this demon vampire kind of doing his thing. They didn't want to spend too much money on the vampire costumes, so he possesses a normal-looking guy pretty quickly.
Yeah, and he just spends majority of the movie in the normal-looking guy's body, which is kind of a cop-out.
It's a cop-out, but
I wanted to see the monsters.
Right, and that's a lot of... it's a common trend in fantasy movies. Think Bud the Chud, or what are other ones? Jason Goes to Hell, the worst Friday the 13th.
Even The Babadook, which was a great movie, kind of did that in the last half, where you don't see the monster anymore, and it's just the possessed mother.
Exactly.
But with this movie, so he gets possessed, and he's the magistrate of this, small fiefdom or whatever.
Yeah.
This takes place in, the Edo period.
Medieval Japan.
Yeah, and he becomes corrupted, and he starts, killing people and possessing other people and drinking blood. And the whole plot then becomes about protecting this noble woman from him trying to suck her blood. And all the surrounding monsters who live in the villa rise up in arms against this vampire, led by... Kappa, that's his name.
Yeah. So the yokai monsters are kind of trickster gods, I think of them as. They're not entirely good. They're a little bit mischievous. Some of them are kind of, scary, and they definitely attack innocent people, but they're not bloodthirsty murderers like the vampire. Yeah. They're more think a Nazi or a Brer Rabbit kind of figures.
Oh, you said a Nazi.
A Nancy the Spider.
Yes, okay.
Or Brer Rabbit. Sort of the trickster god types. I want to go through them real quick, just who the yokai were. Kappa, who we used to know from an Eric
Carle book on mythological creatures.
It was Eric Carle.
Yep.
Yeah, Kappa, who's a devilish little water sprite. Really great.
He's like a turtle guy.
He's like a turtle man Really good costume, rubber suit they did for him. Mouth doesn't move too much, but he's a cool monster. They had the two-mouthed woman, and she has a face on the back of her head.
She was really creepy and cool.
Although it doesn't really do much.
No, it doesn't move. It's very stagnant. It's got a long Pinocchio nose.
They had the really, really weird one named Kasa Obaki, who is a like a beach umbrella.
Oh yeah, that guy was so silly.
With a tongue and an eye. And he was a pretty, he communicated by, doing sign language that was just him, moving his arms up and down. But Kappa knew what he was saying. There was the long-necked woman, Rokuro Kubi.
She was my favorite.
And they did that by mostly having a woman look around a corner.
Right. From distant shots, they would have, a puppet of, a long neck with a head on the end. But when they had to show her mouth move, they would just have her stick her head out from behind a tree and then have the neck coming out of the other side of the tree.
Yeah.
It was, pretty obvious, but, it was the 70s.
It was pretty cool. Then they have the one that they actually call Abura Sumashi, who I called Nuki for the entire movie.
Oh, the guy with the big, silly head.
So if you've ever seen what was for a while ranked as the worst children's movie of all time on IMDb, and is well known to be just a terrible ripoff of E.T., Nuki is about, a potato-shaped alien that lands in Africa. Basically, this monster looked a lot like Nuki, but it was good to see a monster that looks like Nuki doing something interesting for once, because Nuki is just unwatchable. And finally, you barely probably remember this guy, but Nupepo, who was just kind of the sad, droopy-faced monster.
I remember the droopy one.
Yeah.
Then there were two more that showed up later, one of whom his stomach turns into, a TV.
Yeah,
and
he's like a Teletubby.
Yeah, and you can, see the future in his stomach, or whatever. He shows them what's going on in other places.
And then there's one other one that's just like a warrior in medieval outfit. I think.
He's got a wolf face or something.
There's a lot of characters.
Yeah,
and
then even at the end, they call on legions of other monsters to show up.
That's why it's called Spook Warfare, is it ends in a very Power Rangers-esque fight where the vampire guy goes in giant, like Megazord, and then they attack with all the yokai spooks. There's also a cool sequence where they get trapped inside of a jar. They get shrunk down and trapped in a jar.
Break the curse.
Yeah, you need someone else to touch the jar. I don't remember.
But unfortunately, the majority of the movie is human drama stuff that was hard to follow, and characters being introduced and then never showing up again.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a problem that we've had in the past with Japanese genre movies. And, it just is this thing of,
it was better than Godzilla.
It was a lot better than Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla. But it was the similar idea of, I want a story about these monsters fighting this vampire. I don't want a story about this noble woman and her, romantic interests and political dramas, which is what a good, maybe half, not the majority, but a good chunk of this movie was.
Yeah.
And also, there were two villains, but I thought they were the same guy for a long time.
Yeah.
And, then one of them has an eye patch, and I just thought he'd lost his eye.
And Harry's not racist. He can tell the difference between Japanese people.
Usually, in movies, but I couldn't in this one because they had no distinguishing characteristics.
That's the thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and then more than that, there's a part where these two children, their parents get murdered, and they run off into the woods, and they run into Kappa, and this is 20 minutes in, and Kappa's like, we'll protect you, we'll go fight these soldiers.
At this point, you think we're setting up to have these two funny characters.
Right, the movie's going to be about these two kids who are now protected by monsters, and they have these monster friends, and they fight the vampire. So then the monsters go fight the soldiers, and we never see the kids again throughout the whole movie. They just leave them in the woods.
I think they probably died.
They starve to death in the woods.
Which is funny, because as the movie goes on, you realize this is kind of a kid's movie.
Yeah, it's very much a kid's movie, and it would have made sense for it to be about kids being taken care of by the monsters, but it's not. It's
not at all. And you particularly kind of think it's a kid's movie when there's the Yokai brothers.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about that too. There's this really silly, over-the-top scene with these two guards. Yes. And one of them keeps getting hit licked in the face because the beach umbrella guy licks people.
Yes.
But it turns out it's the other guy hitting him with a piece of salmon.
Yeah, which is apparently a prank.
Yeah.
He had a giant, what must be, from us who just ate sushi today, must be a very expensive cut of sashimi.
Yeah.
And he keeps touching his face with this pure white tuna.
As a prank.
As a prank. It made me hungry, honestly.
And the whole sequence is so, they're over-the-top acting and their facial expressions. And I said while we were watching, I'm like, I bet you these guys are a comedy duo in Japan.
I think I said that.
That they then had a cameo. No, I did, because I was thinking of...
I don't care.
I was thinking of that movie that we watched at the theater.
Dead of Night.
Dead of Night. It reminded me a lot of Dead of Night when all of a sudden they have that British comedy duo do a whole long sequence.
Yeah, except that was a better sequence.
Yeah, this was so silly. And then at the end we see the Yokai brothers.
Yes.
We didn't look them up, but I'm sure they were some hacky Laurel and Hardy type.
It was
comedy
it was your standard like Scooby-Doo kind of routine
Yeah.
where they keep getting. I was just okay. So he's like, I keep getting licked in the face.
Yeah.
And then fake out. It was his Yokai brother just hitting him with the sashimi.
Yeah.
But then that guy
And
gets
his
licked
beach
in the
umbrella
face.
licks his face.
Yeah.
And then he's like, he's like, no, you're playing around. He's like, no, it's real. And
Yeah.
it's way over the top. And their facial acting is so hilarious.
Once again, just think of Shaggy and Scooby doing, "But Scoob, it's a ghost. It's a beach
very-
umbrella."
What's that?
Yeah, basically that. So, and then the end, it had this almost like, at the end, of course, it didn't build this feeling, but at the end, as you watch the Yokai Monster army, just this army of monsters, a lot of cool costumes, a lot of cool effects there, very cool visuals, walk into the horizon, it feels almost like the March of the Spirits in like Princess Mononoke. Where
Well, it was very much of that same mythology.
definitely, that Shinto thing, but they played the ending so long, you watch the monsters walk away and it plays this soft music.
Right, it's a really not well edited scene.
Well, I feel like that's the kind of sequence where if you had sort of a childhood built around Shintoism, it might be a much more kind of sweet, nostalgic moment
Yeah.
of like finally you get to see your familiar, beautiful yokai monsters in victory walk onto the horizon, And in that sense, it was probably beautiful to people who were more familiar with these characters.
Yeah.
あんなやつのさばらしといたら日本妖怪の直れや
I generally liked it. I really liked the costumes and the craftsmanship and the puppetry and all that type of stuff. I thought that, as far as plot and characters, there wasn't a whole lot going on.
Yeah, it's not really plot or characters other than the monsters. The monsters are the characters, and seeing them interact, seeing their costumes, seeing them play their goofy little tricks or god tricks is the joy of the movie.
Yeah, and it was fun, and I definitely enjoyed watching it. Yeah.
And you get way more monster action than you get in a Godzilla movie.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
like 3 times more.
They're like interlaced throughout the story. It keeps you interested. There might be a few moments with too much human drama, but then soon after you get Kappa popping out of a lake being like, I'm Kappa.
Yeah.
I'm here to stop the
And
vampire.
he has all these rigs throughout the forest that are like buckets on strings, so that when he gets too dry, he can pull them and dump water on his head.
Yeah, he's an amphibian after all. But it's a movie where the joy of it is the joy. Like these are the kind of monsters that a kid might want to collect action figures of.
Well, I told Kai at the movie theater that we watched that, and he had the same reaction as us, where he goes, "Oh yeah, that movie's a little sleepy, but the monsters are cool."
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's a little sleepy, but the monsters are cool. And I think that it's cool to have a cast of memorable characters that you can later be like, oh, I remember all the characters from that movie because they were distinct.
Yeah.
Not the human characters who were not distinct at all, but the monsters.
Yeah.
In a similar way, I think Stagecoach was a movie built around.
So Stagecoach is a movie that I watched earlier today, and that I don't know a single... That's not true. I know like 2 characters' names, but I could tell you every one of those characters and what their character traits were, even though I might not know their names.
Just to lay it out, Stagecoach is one of the essential golden age of Hollywood westerns.
Yeah, 1939.
John Ford, same year as Wizard of Oz, which is
Yeah.
kind of the height of magic Hollywood action, like Hollywood magic, kind of really becoming beautiful, sound cinema.
From the adventures of these American frontier characters, John Ford has created a truly great motion picture, Stagecoach, a drama as forceful and as true as The Informer, and as gripping as The Hurricane.
So it's early John Wayne too. It's like the youngest.
It's like his second or third. He's 22 in that movie.
He's like looking good.
No, he looks old though.
I think I was so a little uncomfortable. I was watching that movie with my mom, and
Yeah.
she couldn't stop commenting how hot he was.
Really?
The whole movie.
I thought he looked older than a 22-year-old in 1939 looks a lot older than a 22-year-old in 2017.
Well, they worked harder.
Exactly.
That's
Probably.
what-
His
that's what
face is
it
like
is.
weathered. He's got like tough.
Us millennials have
Yeah.
these soft hands.
Stagecoach is a pretty basic setup. There's been reports of Indian activity in the territory. The opening scene is they're getting a telegram from a general warning them about Indians, and the telegram cuts off.
Right. And it's specifically legendary Apache Geronimo.
Yeah. But there's people have to travel. This banker has to deliver some bank money. A hooker, an assumed hooker, they never explicitly state, and the town drunk are getting ridden out of town.
I just want to put some names here so we can remember. The hooker's name is Dallas.
Dallas, yeah.
And the doc's name is Doc. The drunk's name is he's a doctor, and
Yeah,
I
he's
think
a drunk doctor named Doc Booth or something like that.
they Doc Boone.
Boone.
And they call him Doc throughout most of the movie, and
Mhm.
he's your funny character of a drunk doctor.
Drunk doctor, but he's also like kind of insightful. And then there's also a whiskey salesman
A whiskey
who has to travel to another town named Peacock, and no one can remember his name.
He's a very meek man.
He's like a sad sack, but he's funny, and
He's completely becomes the beta dog to the doctor, who's like,
Yeah,
you
he
sell
just
whiskey?
keeps stealing his whiskey.
And he even a few times pathetically is like, please stop drinking my whiskey. And the doc's like, shut
no
up,
one
man.
can remember his name, and he keeps saying Kansas City, and they go, Missouri. He goes, no, Kansas.
yeah, the lesser Kansas City, as it were.
And then the other character is this not rich, but like this well-off woman.
This well-off, like, blue blood woman
who's married to a general who's fighting the Indians.
She wants to get to her husband, who's somewhere on the front lines.
Yeah.
And then finally we have this kind of ominous gambler.
This weird gambler character.
Played by John Carradine.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hatfield is his name.
Led by the two Stagecoach drivers, who are the funny Buck, who's like the kind of goofy fat guy who talks like this.
I want to point out that he is, I think, the voice of Charlie in the Box from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
I knew he was familiar.
Nobody wants a Charlie in the Box. He's that really croaky voice. It was super good for this vibe.
He was perfect for that character. And then the leader of the Stagecoach is this guy Curly,
Yeah.
who's also a bounty hunter.
He's a marshal.
Yeah, he's a marshal.
And he's looking for criminals.
He's looking for specifically this criminal called Ringo the Kid.
Yeah, the Ringo Kid.
The Ringo Kid who just broke out of prison.
Who is John Wayne.
Well, we find that out 20 minutes in when they run into the Ringo Kid and arrest him.
Please pardon a brief aside from future Nick. So I realized after Harry and I had this conversation about Stagecoach that I was wrong. The actor who plays Buck did not do the voice of Charlie in the Box. Charlie in the Box is from the Rankin Bass Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer cartoon. Charlie in the Box is the misfit toy version of Jack in the Box, and he laments that no one wants to play with a Charlie in the Box. That voice was actually done by an actor named Alfie Scop, who I didn't really know from anything else. But Andy Devine was the actor who played Buck in Stagecoach, and he did do another voice from my childhood, which is Friar Tuck in the Disney Robin Hood.
All right, laugh, you two rogues. But there's going to be a big to-do in Nottingham. Well done, ain't it?
I obviously crossed wires in my head and somehow thought Charlie in the Box instead of Friar Tuck. Thank you for listening to this brief correction. We now return to the contemporaneous conversation.
I want to just pause briefly, and I know you don't like to get too woke, but I think we do have to talk about the way this movie depicts Indians a little bit.
But they're not really depicted. They don't have a single line of dialogue.
That's kind of the problem. And that's kind of what I wanted to say. Is early on, of course, it's no secret. Marlon Brando let the whole world know. Well, and it's good he did, that these old Westerns' biggest problem is they depict the West as savage Indians and the noble frontiersmen who fought them back. Now, this one doesn't say that explicitly, and early on it almost seems like it's a little more complex, because it's not just saying Indians in general. They're talking about Apache, and they are allied with a Comanche.
And he shows a Comanche. The Comanche doesn't have any lines.
They don't have any lines.
It shows his face, and a white man off screen says he hates the Apache more than anyone.
Yeah, which was a little bit more of a realistic depiction of how these things happened. There were already some wars between certain Native American tribes.
Yeah.
And then the frontiersmen
would join up with whoever was beneficial to them.
Made alliances. It's the same way Cortez conquered South America.
Right.
I think that they didn't directly try to propaganda as though Indians were savage and that these guys were super noble. They just avoided the topic by
having them be only an action set piece.
Yeah.
The Indians are a faceless horde.
They're a force of nature.
Yeah.
They are not depicted as people.
They're basically like a wildfire.
Exactly. And you're right, there's not a single Native American line except at one point a half Apache woman sings a song.
I forgot about her.
That's all that happens.
Yeah.
She sings a song.
She steals their horses.
But you've got to set up for a good, Tom Green buddy comedy. It's basically road trip. They all pile into the Stagecoach and head out into Geronimo country.
Right. And they have an army supporting them for a ways, but then the army has to leave to go fight somewhere else.
The army's like, it's not safe to go this way anymore, and you shouldn't go this way. But everyone in the Stagecoach, for their own reasons, I got to get to Kansas City. I got to get to my husband. I got run out of town. We got to keep going.
Well, actually, the guy who's going to Kansas City says, "Well, I would like to get off," but Doc Boone won't let him. Like, "No, be a man. You'll stay on."
And Buck doesn't want to go. Yeah. I don't want to do this. Buck also never gets to eat. He keeps
like, I was just about to eat.
Come on, Buck. We got to go. But as they go, it's a really good development of these characters within this tight environment.
Yeah.
Once again, kind of like a play. It's a Stagecoach. I want to talk about one.
People keep getting in the back of the coach, and I'm like, this is already way too full.
They have 3 on each side, and they have John Wayne lying in the middle of their feet.
Yeah.
And
two people in front.
The blue blood woman I think her name's Lucy. Is that right? Anyway, she won't go anywhere near Dallas.
Because Dallas is a prostitute.
Even though Dallas is
constantly is offering help and being really sweet.
Dallas is kind of trying to indicate to her, like, I'm just a lady like you.
Yeah.
I understand that you're, like, having a hard time in this bumpy stagecoach full of dudes, and I'm just trying to be nice to you. And
I just got driven out of town by the ladies for Law and Order.
Yeah, the Temperance League drove her out of town. And the Blue Blood woman is just like, I'm having nothing to do with it. We talked about this before, and I really want to just think about the historical reality of riding in a stagecoach. This was not on paved roads. These are not even roads, but if they are, they're dirt, plain, the mesas of the Southwest kind of roads. And these are wooden
wheels.
You pointed this out when we were watching Fiery Miles, and then I thought about it in this too. It's just like, how fucking bumpy must it have been.
And you find out later that the Blue Blood woman is pregnant this whole time.
That's what I was getting to.
Yeah.
And I think that the bumpy stagecoach kind of makes her give birth a little early.
Well, that's the thing. She's not showing at all.
No, she's dressed down. She's hiding it.
There's, I guess it's spoilers, because there's a scene near the end where she falls ill.
Yeah.
And they go, the doctors take care of her, and he comes back with a baby.
Yeah, it's a good sequence.
And then Dallas takes care of her baby, and that's how they finally connect.
It's a baby.
It's a little girl.
It's a little girl. Well, I'll be doggone. Why didn't somebody tell me?
When they find Ringo is immediately arrested by the marshal.
Yeah.
And they're like, on this giant journey we're going on, we're going to also cart Ringo off to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Ringo and Dallas, they're both on the wrong side of the law, and they both start to kind of fall for each other.
Yeah.
Dallas, of course, knows he doesn't know that she's a prostitute, although he kind of does know. He's kind of sort of figured it out, it seems like. And he keeps basically being like, I really like you. You seem like my kind of woman. You're rough and you're cool and you're kind. And she's like, if you knew my past, you wouldn't say that. And he's like, I don't care about that. It doesn't matter to me. It's kind of almost progressive in that romance.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting.
Well, then there's the other creepy implied romance where the gambler is just like aggressively hitting on the Blue Blood woman the whole movie, to like, even though she's married.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't really understand. He didn't really have much. My only real, because it's a very character driven movie. And it's all about these characters who have these desires, and they're set up and paid off really well. Right. Except for the gambler doesn't really have much of an arc.
Yeah,
he's kind of just a menacing figure who's there.
You thought he was going to be like a real villain at some point. It feels like he is, and he never really is. I want to say, though, that I tried really hard to be cynical about this movie when I started watching it. Like, at the beginning, I tried really hard to be like, this is kind of a dated Western. It depicts, like, Indians as a force of nature. It's got John Wayne, Mr. Republican, of the century. And, it's probably just not going to be that good and dated. Yeah. But the Hollywood magic of the way they built this standard Hollywood romance in the Stagecoach was really well done.
No, I loved it from the very first minute, actually. In the opening scene where it's just showing the characters in town, I was already like, oh, these are very well-established characters. Like, this is going to be a well-written, good character-driven piece. Especially the scene where Doc Boone goes into the bar and is like, can you give me one on the house? And the bartender's like, if words were money, you'd be my best customer, Doc. And he goes, I'm leaving town today. And he goes, honest? Here you go. And he pours him a shot. I'm like, oh, this is great. I love this.
I love how all the bars in the Old West just have whiskey.
Yeah.
It's just a clear bottle, and they're just around the bar, and you stop every now and then and get whiskey. I was also thinking about how dehydrated everyone must have been, because...
Yeah, there's one part where she goes, pass me the canteen, and it's like, oh yeah, you guys have been drinking water this whole time?
And then the guy pours a silver cup for the Blue Blood, but he won't give the silver cup to Dallas.
Really?
And then she drinks straight out of the canteen because she's not good enough for the silver cup. It's Hatfield who does it.
Yeah, and Hatfield's like a symbol of like aristocracy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what this movie is really good at is that bottle episode. Close a bunch of characters. I mean, it's just a great narrative setup to pack a bunch of well-established characters into a really tight space. Mm-hmm. Literally a really tight space.
And then like an external threat around them.
Yes, and they're braving off into the frontier.
Mm-hmm.
And near the end, it's actually not that near the end, but like kind of the climax of the journey is that they get attacked finally by the Apache.
Well, and the cool thing about that is they get attacked about an hour and 15 minutes in, and up until that point, there has not been a single gunshot fired.
Right.
It is just dialogue. It's a Western about people talking to each other. Mm-hmm. And there's a medical emergency with giving the birth to the baby, and they talk about what they should do, and the bankers like yells at people a lot, but it's mostly just dialogue. And then the Indians attack, and it's a really great action sequence.
With,
like, incredible stunts.
I want to pause at what you just said, though, and break down something about the characters, too. You could also very much look at this movie as sort of a microcosm of America in its inception, because it's the West. They're developing the West. They're founding the West. And you have kind of people who represent different aspects of this new American society. You've got the outlaw with Ringo, but he's the lovable outlaw. He's the kind of guy who, like Pretty Boy Floyd. He's like the kind of outlaw that people love, like a folktale. And you got Dallas, who represents the prostitute, who in a lot of ways were some of the first women in the West at all. You've got the blue blood woman who represents the aristocracy, and also the banker who represents kind of the worst side of the aristocracy. Yeah. He even says at one point, and I thought, wow, man.
He says, what's good for the banks is good for the country.
And he also says, a businessman should be president and run the country like a business.
Which was crazy.
I know, because that's what we have right now.
I have a slogan that should be blazoned on every newspaper in the country. America for Americans. The government must not interfere with business. Reduce taxes. Our national debt is something shocking. Over $1 billion a year. What this country needs is a businessman for president.
And to see that idea that it's always been these bank types who are like, the country, America needs to be run like a business. Yeah. And that guy's depicted as easily the least sympathetic of any character in the movie. He's clearly this evil, money-hungry jerk. And you find out at the end, he's a thief. Yeah. He's the real criminal. It is kind of that cool statement that, like, Ringo's your criminal, but he's your poor criminal. So you like him. The real criminals are the bankers. I mean, like, that's something we can all get behind, right? And it's also like a good microcosm at the same time. So I think you could also look at it as a microcosm of America and all the kind of people that will make up America. But to get to the Apache sequence.
Yeah, it's just really great. It's just a very standard, siege moment. But it's full of amazing stunts, and it's really well filmed.
Let me just say, once again, problematic. Horses died
making
this movie.
Probably. You can see they're just tripping them with wires and shit. But, like, really great. Like, it's all stuntmen just jumping off of horses. There's a part where a guy's hanging from the horses, and then he falls and goes between their hooves and under the wagon. Yeah. And I thought for sure it was a dummy, but then he stands up.
That was a shot. That was a real stunt.
That was a real dude. There's a part where John Wayne stunt double was jumping from horse to horse.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
that wasn't
really cool.
That wasn't actually John Wayne.
No, of course not.
but yeah, the stunts are ridiculous. I mean, you can know if you've seen Singing in the Rain that basically to get work as a stuntman in Golden Age of Hollywood, 30s Hollywood, you had to be like, I don't give a fuck. I'll do anything.
Well, and they died all the time. That's the other thing. People died making movies all the time back in those days.
It was a risk of the business. Yeah. If you were not an actor, or if you were not in the technical side of things, or if you weren't fronting the money, the way to get into cinema was just to be like, I will fucking fall between four horses going full speed and roll between wagon wheels. I'll do that. Yeah. And who knows how many guys they went through before they got the shot right. But they got the shot perfect. Yeah. It was amazing. We couldn't believe that stunt.
No, that was crazy.
And just the Apache sequence goes on for a while. You really think that they are going to get it. They're all losing. It's a great sequence because you get that thing that's the best. The thing that makes action sequences interesting. Because we've talked about before.
Consequences.
Exactly. When action sequences go on too long and people are just shooting back and forth and no one's getting hit, and it's just like
or superheroes are punching each other over and over again. It's making no difference.
Like a great example of like the worst kind of action sequence that you see way too often is like the lightsaber fight at the end of Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, or the one I always go back to is when Iron Man beats up Hulk in the second Avengers movie, and it just keeps going on, and they're knocking down buildings, and it's not ending, and there are no consequences to any of it.
But in this one, Apaches are getting shot. People in the stagecoach are getting hit with the whiskey guy gets an arrow to the chest.
Yeah, and you thought he was dead.
Yeah, there's guns going off. They're running out of ammo. The woman who just gave birth is cradling her baby who's in the cart, and she's like obviously not too well. She just gave birth, and she's like looks like she's gonna like die of fright in the middle of all of this. And even at the last minute, Hatfield has one bullet left, and he turns and points it at the head of the blue-blooded woman because he's like, I'm going to put her out of her misery, or something.
But then he gets shot.
And then at that moment, Deus Ex Machina, and I don't know if this is what originated it, because I've always heard, like, then the cavalry charged in.
Yeah.
Then the cavalry charged in.
And it's her husband leading the charge.
Yeah. So no, it's not him.
Yeah. No, you're right.
She gets to the town, and she's like, where is he? And he's okay. We're going to go find him.
But they hear the bugles.
Yeah. And the cavalry charges in.
Yeah.
So that part is fantastic. And just to say, it's set up where you think it's going to be tragic. And I remember at the end, Mom kept saying, "Oh no," like because Ringo's going to get in a standoff in the town at the end. And she's like, "Oh no, him and Dallas are supposed to end up together because Ringo's been saying all these things to Dallas about, I don't care about your past. I'm gonna make you a respectable woman.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take you to my ranch in Mexico. I'm gonna marry you." And
Yeah.
Dallas is seeing this bright future she never expected, and you feel a little bit the tragedy that could happen of one of them getting killed,
Right.
of this being just like a of mice and men dream.
Mhm.
But I kept saying to Mom, like, this isn't that kind of movie. It's gonna have a happy ending. You could
Yeah.
feel the Hollywood magic, and at the end, the marshal, without really telling him, just decides, you know what, like, go ahead and run off together.
Yeah, and they run off on the stripped down stagecoach
Yeah.
into the sunset. And it's really nice. I loved it. It was really classic, great old Hollywood fun. And maybe the first John Ford movie I've ever seen.
I think Shane is by John Ford.
Did he make the man who shot Liberty Valance?
I haven't seen that one.
Okay, because I've seen that.
I asked you to marry me, didn't I?
I'll never forget to ask my kid. That's something.
Wait here.
But John Ford is like the typical American Western director from
Yeah.
the original era of Westerns,
Mhm.
not the spaghetti Western.
Yeah.
Revisionist Western later.
There was one weird thing that I thought was funny where Doc Boone calls tobacco weed.
Yeah, I'm glad you remember that. I love my weed. And
Yeah,
he
that was
smokes on-
so weird.
I thought that was cool. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's a clip that someone must have mixed into an electronic song at some point.
Sure, yeah.
Put off that cigar. You're annoying this lady. Excuse me, madam. Being so partial to the weed myself, I sometimes forget that it disagrees with others.
The last movie that we watched just now was a movie Harry suggested, a slasher I'd somehow not seen that was a great run-of-the-mill slasher I'd
Yeah.
somehow missed, called StageFright Aquarius.
Yeah, well, when I saw it was just called StageFright. I think they added Aquarius when they brought it to home video to differentiate it from the Hitchcock movie.
Right.
But the Aquarius, the title Aquarius doesn't come out anywhere in the movie.
No.
It should have just been called StageFright.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe the theater was called Aquarius.
But they don't ever acknowledge that.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And
I saw this movie because it's by Michel Suave, who I really like. He directed, most famously, Cemetery Man. But he also made this movie called The Church that's pretty good. And then this one, which I really like.
It's also called Deliria, apparently.
Which is a cooler name.
And Bloody Bird, which is actually the most descriptive of what it really is.
Right.
This fits into the genre, which is actually fairly common, which is like stage horror. There's a Vincent Price movie called Theater of Blood, where he plays an angry actor who's killing everyone in like the theme of Shakespeare plays.
And we also watched Opera.
Yeah.
That,
Opera, of course.
Right, that Argento
Dario
movie,
Argento,
yeah.
also called Terror at the Opera.
Yeah.
And there's an episode of Tales from the Crypt with John Lovitz, where he goes to an insane asylum of actors.
And there's also the movie Curtains that we almost watched tonight.
Yeah, so there's a fair amount of play and theater-based horror.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, the Phantom of the Opera.
I guess that would be
Phantom of the Paradise.
the OG.
There's a 16-year-old girl at my school who's obsessed with Brian De Palma's Phantom of the Paradise.
That's cool.
And I'm like, how did you even find that movie? She's like, I just saw it on TV and now it's my favorite movie.
That girl's cool, dude.
So, teenagers of the world, give the 70s a chance. This was the 80s, actually. 87. Kind of actually near the end of the slasher era, but still a solid slasher movie.
I hurt myself.
Oh, I'm awfully sorry about that. You better go home and take care of whatever it is that's hurting you. And before you go, would you clean out your dressing room and give the key to Laurel? She's taking over your role.
Well, that's the whole thing, is it doesn't do anything particularly different. The basic plot is these actors are, like, jamming in the last few performances, or last few rehearsals before they open, this weird, like, surreal musical about a serial killer.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, a actor who's gone crazy and become a serial killer breaks out of an asylum and follows them back to where they're rehearsing and begins killing them one by one.
We also have a pretty... I'm not going to go through everyone like we did with Stagecoach
Yeah.
or Yokai, but there's quite a few memorable characters in this one. We've got a lot of prima donna actors and actresses. We've got the psycho director who won't give them a break and who's all about perfection. He's like Fletcher from Whiplash. He's like, you must be the best.
Except like way more pathetic and pitiable.
Yeah, because it's like a who cares show in some town.
And we also have the like sleazy money man.
Yeah. Whose name is, I think, Ferrari.
Yeah.
This movie is, of course, one of those Italian passing as American.
It passes better than a lot of other Italian
It does.
movies.
Because they have some legit American actors.
They're all, well, most of them are British, actually, but they're all speaking their actual dialogue. It's dubbed. Some of the side characters are dubbed.
Yeah.
But the main characters are all speaking their actual dialogue.
So, it's just as a slasher goes, basically they all end up, because it's some ancient Italian building where you can lock it from the inside with
And there's only one door.
Actually, when we moved into our house in Palo Alto, it had no knob and just a key and a lock, and if you lost the key, you were trapped. But you still got the back.
Yeah.
But there's only one door. It's like an old dungeon, and they get locked in because the director wants them to keep practicing. So he says to an actress,
hide the key.
Lock the door and hide the key, and then she's the first to get murdered. So no one knows where the fuck the key is. And the murderer dons, because the play they're doing is called The Night Owl, and the murderer gets in there and dons this owl mask. Think, once again, Kabuki. We're having a lot of movies where people put on like weird theatrical masks.
Yeah, well, there's a wall of Kabuki masks in the changing room too, which comes up later on in the movie, and I'll talk about that in a bit. When after everyone's been killed, she walks by the changing room, and all the Kabuki masks have turned into like horror monster masks.
Yeah,
which is just a really cool, surreal touch.
Now, one thing I want to say that some people might complain about, and I'll give it the legitimacy, but then I'm going to explain it, is that a lot of slasher masks, like if you think about specifically Jason's hockey mask that he puts on in part 3 and then throughout the rest of the series, or Michael Myers' mask, specifically the hockey mask that Jason wears, it's just like ready to go. It's tight to the face. You can see clearly through it. It actually offers some protection. It makes sense for a slasher to wear that kind of mask.
Yeah.
This giant, bulky owl head is got to be the hardest thing to see and murder effectively through.
You're right.
But this killer is obsessed with theatrics, and so wearing the owl mask is probably more about playing a part than anything else.
Yeah. And there's like, it's just a standard slasher movie, but it's just well made. The gore is well done and effective. The music is great. It's got that fantastic like hip hop beat.
It's got a break beat. It sounds like I just want to fly.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like a Sugar Ray beat.
Yeah,
but way ahead of its time in that regard because it's 87.
It's early break beats.
Yeah, and it's just well done. And there's like cool artistic moments and surrealist touches like the Kabuki masks. There's also this feather motif. So at the very beginning, we see this woman who's like a prostitute on the street smoking cigarettes, and a feather falls out of her wig and lands on her feet. And then she gets murdered, and it zooms out, and it's the set for the play that they're rehearsing.
Very similar to a lot of Jess Franco movies.
Yeah, where it starts with an act that you don't know is an act until it zooms out. And then that woman gets knocked out, but she wakes up when a feather falls on her again.
Yeah.
And then later the killer sprinkles feathers all over the stage, and she's crawling under the stage, and the feathers are falling through the boards and raining down on her. It's really, like, pretty visually interesting and really well shot, and it creates like quite a tone.
It's basically it's all about birds. If you want to read the subtext, it's all about birds. And I liked it also. There's a really great sequence. It's the kind of thing you'd expect out of this kind of movie where they're rehearsing the play, and who they think is the actor comes in the owl mask, murders the girl in what they think is acting, and then they start to realize that it's the real killer in the real mask doing the murdering. The music's fantastic. The way it's shot is fantastic.
Yeah, when it keeps cutting to their reaction
That's
shots.
how Brandon Lee actually died,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He got shot out under filming The Crow, and they thought he was acting, but he was dying.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how Brandon Lee
That's the
died.
same with the scene in Back to the Future 3, where Michael J. Fox gets strung up by a rope.
And he almost actually
And
died.
he almost got hung to death.
Basically.
Yeah. So that's a really great sequence. Just the editing and the shooting, it's a lot more competent than a lot of Italian movies. Not to disgrace Italian horror directors, but
it's
a lot
fair.
of them don't have a real eye for editing.
Especially if you're thinking of like Baron Blood or something like that.
Yeah, a lot of Italian horror movies from the 70s and 80s are very haphazardly cobbled together. And this was like made with care and delicacy and looked like it had a bit of a budget.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting just because it's all actors, and so you have this like really interesting, all these egos at play in there, and early on you have drama about like, oh, she's replacing you because you're not working hard enough.
Woman's pregnant.
Yeah. And then what's interesting, I also pointed out, is a lot of the main characters are dead in some really good slasher kills. We got a drill kill. We got the stabbing on the stage, as we said.
Yeah, we got a good one where he ties up one of the actors and puts the owl mask on them, so the director thinks it's the killer and hacks them up with an axe.
Which is very theatrical. The whole mistaken identity, which happens twice. The mistaken identity of first thinking it is the actor, and then the mistaken identity of thinking it is the killer and killing the actor.
Right.
Very theatrical reversals and character misunderstandings. But a lot of the middle characters die. I call them the middle characters because a lot of the cast dies kind of like in the second act and at the end of the second act, and then there's a very long final kind of chase and pursuit between. And I love good pursuit sequences.
Yeah.
Between the final girl and the killer. It goes on for a while, and
it's maybe a little bit too long.
Maybe, but they use theater imagery really well, where the imagery of the environment of a theater.
Right. She starts off in the changing room and walks through the back.
Yeah, she walks
under the stage.
Under the stage, then up in the catwalk.
He chases her down the catwalk.
They utilize all the cool and weird spaces of a theater.
Right, she pushes him off and he's climbing up the curtain rope and she has to hack it off.
And she watches him, before the sequence even really gets going, she watches him arrange all the bodies like a tableau on the stage and then sits in the middle petting the cat like a villain. And is just clearly this kind of, you finally get some characterization of the killer as this, an insane actor. Someone who's very much like the characters in that Tales from the Crypt with John Lovitz. Where he's setting the stage for this final performance with all these corpses. And I said in that sequence that if I was a serial killer, I'd probably be the kind of serial killer who would want to like make some sort of grotesque art with it all. And then I would look at what I've done. Like, he's so proud of himself. But I would look at like all the bodies around the stage and be like, what the fuck am I doing with my life?
It's 10 now, we're just open till 8:30.
I can't stand here all night. I'll go crazy. Don't you understand that?
But Peter, we can't stay in here. You could block the doors and set fire to the whole place.
He's enjoying himself. Do you realize? He's enjoying himself.
And then the actual ending, the last minute of dialogue, is so silly and over the top that I also love that too. I don't know if you want to spoil that.
Go ahead.
It's just the janitor guy comes back and he's talking to her about the gun and he won't shut up about the gun that she tried to kill the killer with. And then the killer shows up and he shoots him right between the eyes. And then he just goes, right between the eyes. So didn't I tell you? Right between the eyes. And he says it like 17 times.
He really doesn't get that she's not listening.
No. And then the killer looks at the camera and smirks.
And does a little smirk.
And then it just cuts back to like a couple seconds of the woman from the earlier playing the saxophone as the credits roll.
That saxophone was a real indication that we were moving into the 90s. Because saxophones in rock music, right? That was a real 90s
That was an 80s, 90s thing.
80s, 90s, yeah. I think that if we want to focus on one detail of this movie, we focused on the fact that it's a theater. But you pointed it out. It really is a movie that showcases how important editing is in making an effective horror movie. It's
in building tension, if anything.
If you want to be a director who goes for the long shot, go for the long shot. But if you want to be a director who cuts between shots, do it well. And this is the best kind of cut between shots.
There's really good what they call coverage.
What does that mean?
Coverage is just getting different angles and different shots for a certain scene.
Right.
So, like, remember that movie, The Town That Dreaded Sundown?
Oh, my God.
That movie had no coverage.
It's awful.
And it had, because of having no coverage, it had no tension and no pace.
An early slasher, Harry and I didn't even make it through.
No, because there would be a scene where it would just be the camera would be sat for one angle, just shooting a guy attack people in a car, and it would never cut. It would never cut in close. And, like, that's what Hitchcock basically cemented, is that suspense, the climax of suspense is done through these quick cut rising montages, like the murder in Psycho, the shower scene murder. And that's the way the first on-stage stabbing is done in this movie, with a rising quick cut montage, where as it gets closer to her being murdered, the cuts get quicker, they get more drastic, the angles get sharper, and the music rises. And, like, that's just classic suspense.
Yeah. And, you know, maybe they were paying homage with the name StageFright, because it does have that Hitchcock level of editing, of creating suspense. And by the way, the Psycho shower scene is, of course, one of literally probably the most single analyzed scene in film history.
Yeah.
Can you think of a single scene people spend more time thinking about and studying in film school? I mean, that scene, and it's the same kind of kills in this movie. The quick cuts between killer, them. But what's cool is also they do that classic killer, victim, weapon, witness, you know, but then they do something interesting, which is also, as we go on, the final girl kind of flashes to her images of the murders throughout the movie. Like she's starting to pick up on them and, you know, absorb them in a sort of way. There's some cool imagery early on of a lionfish too.
Which I don't know why that was.
You know, it's a fancy fish, but it's also deadly, like an actor. You know,
there was another really good misdirection scene where the arm reaches through a door and grabs somebody and pulls him to the door, and you think he's gonna like strangle him or whatever, and so they're struggling, and the woman picks up a pin to go stab the arm, but before she can even stab the arm, a drill breaks through the guy's stomach, and he's clearly being drilled from behind the whole time.
And she drops theater blood, and then his real blood joins the theater blood.
It pours on top of the theater blood, which is like clever imagery.
I also think they didn't go into the killer much. They didn't go into his backstory.
They just said he's an actor. He's gone insane.
They didn't go into like a childhood flashback at the beginning, which I would appreciate. I'm always a fan.
It wasn't necessary. He's more of a boogeyman character in this movie.
But even Michael Myers, the ultimate boogeyman character, had a backstory.
Yeah.
I love when slasher movies begin with childhood trauma and then 17 years later. I love that.
It wasn't necessary for this.
Maybe it wasn't.
It wasn't about that. It was about the from the character's the victim's perspective.
You get a little inkling of this guy being kind of like Vincent Price from Theater of Blood when he makes the tableau on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Him being some sort of actor. But you're right, he's just like a force of nature. He really doesn't have much more of a character. It's about the final girl, if anything. Mm-hmm. And her whole thing is, I guess, just that she's a wronged
struggling actress. And she gets fired very early on, so she's like, you feel sorry for her.
Right. It's one of those movies that seems to depict actors as kind of desperate people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Specifically the director.
Well, the director, you said early on, was a lot like a Tales from the Crypt protagonist. Just an over-the-top scumbag.
Yeah.
Piece of shit. But also desperate and pathetic.
The first murder happens before the sequence where they're all trapped inside, and he's like, this will drum up publicity.
Yeah, he's going to exploit it, and he's going to use the killer's name in the script and stuff like that.
And he goes straight from telling them, I'm sorry that one of us died, to we're practicing all night, no one can leave, I locked the door.
Yeah.
And even when someone's like, I think the killer's still in the building, he's like, you're insane! He won't even listen to basic logic.
Then someone is murdered in that same scene.
Yeah, so he changes his tune pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So that's that movie, and I recommend it. I think we should check out more movies by, what's his name?
Michel Suave. We should watch, The Church is kind of forgettable. There's a movie called The Sect that I watched half of.
If you haven't seen Cemetery Man, it's
Cemetery
fantastic.
Man is like one of my all-time favorite Italian horror movies.
Really, really quite good.
Yeah. We'll probably talk about that later on.
I actually like the name StageFright Aquarius, but Bloody Bird is maybe more appropriate.
No, I like Deliria. That's a cool title.
Yeah, it's kind of vague and meaningless.
I mean, StageFright is a perfect title for this, even if it is another movie.
I'd like it better if it's differentiated. StageFright Aquarius gives it that 80s feel, you know?
Yeah, but it means nothing. Maybe if it was a fish killer.
Or maybe if they were doing a production of Hair.
Oh, that'd be very clever.
Which they aren't.
No, they're doing Night Owl.
So what are we going to do now?
You've got to find the key.
So those are 4 movies. We're going to be coming back soon to talk to you about the Russian response to Westerns, the Ostern.
We're going to pick up where we left off with Stagecoach and talk about the Fiery Miles next week.
Which is kind of the poor man's Stagecoach.
Yeah, so we'll see you next time for that, I suppose.
Yeah, signing off. See you next time.